Where do comic fans come from? I've identified 3 origin points for many of today's readers, and I'll talk about them today on the Pipeline Comics Podcast. Hi, I'm August Bleak Jr., and welcome back to the Pipeline Comics Podcast, looking at European comics from a North American perspective, and a whole lot more. In my 30 years of comics, I've noticed a couple of big inflection points that brought new generations of readers into comics. When you listen to interviews with enough comics creators on enough podcasts, certain similarities keep popping up based on their generations. You can see where comics fans were born in mass numbers. These obviously aren't points that hold true for everybody. Everyone has their own sort of path to comics, whether it's friends, family, fathers, brothers, sisters, cousins, comic strips. And seriously, I think I probably came to comics from comic strips first, but there are these big moments in the last 30 years that I've seen that I think we can talk about as being places where comic fans came from. And of course the question becomes, can we learn anything from that to predict the next generation, or even better, to create the next inflection point? I'm afraid that, like much of the world today, things are so spread out and so decentralized that these inflection points aren't easy to pinpoint anymore or even to create. They may not even be possible. But let's start back almost 40 years ago, 35 years ago or so, for the first big push. Many people around my age, early 40s, maybe skewing 4 or 5 years earlier and younger, came to comics via the G.I. Joe television commercial for comics.
She's been kidnapped by Cobra. We have no alternative. Call in G.I. Joe.
Fight for freedom wherever there's trouble. G.I. Joe is there.
Now, it's not all of us, not even me to be honest. I ate up G.I. Joe. I had all the toys. But I don't remember the commercials at all, to be honest. I didn't even start reading comics until 5 years or so after those famous ads. But a lot of people currently in their late 30s to their mid-40s or so were introduced to comics that way. It comes up repeatedly in talking to readers of a certain age. The next wave I see comes from Fox Saturday Morning and their X-Men animated series of the early to mid-1990s. Now, I remember this one pretty well because I was a big animation fan at the time, mostly from the Warner Brothers animated series from Tiny Toons through to Animaniacs, Freakazoid, the Batman series, and also, of course, all the Disney afternoon shows from DuckTales up through Gargoyles, including Tailspin and all the others. And I remember watching that new X-Men series that Saturday morning and thinking it was pretty cool. I'd been reading the X-Men comics for a couple of years already at that point, but there weren't many comics being translated to movies or even animated series yet. The novelty certainly helped them look better. The funny thing is, the series got off to a legendarily bad start. The animation wasn't even finished when they aired that first episode. I don't think they made it more than 2 or 3 episodes before they went into reruns to buy themselves more time to finish making more episodes. It was a bit of a mess. Except for a new generation who never read comics before, this animated series introduced them to superheroes. You hear it repeatedly in interviews with creators in their late 20s and early to mid-30s, particularly with a lot of women comic book creators and readers. If we skip ahead another decade or so, this may be too specific, but I'm guessing it was the Borders-era Manga explosion. That brought kids into bookstores to sit in the aisles and read those little black and white books and get in everyone else's way. Which, yes, I pretty much was an old man already at that point. There doesn't seem to be one book in particular from that explosion, though Sailor Moon does come up a lot.
Never running from a real fight. She is the one named Sailor Moon.
But was that from the manga or the animated series? I don't know. I wasn't reading either at that point or watching either at that point. Someone else will have to clue me in on that. Leave a note in the comments below. As a side note, if the X-Men series brought a lot of women into comics, the manga boom turned it into an avalanche. The comics and animation schools are often majority women now, and so many of their chosen styles are directly manga influenced. The Disney influence is pretty close to that too. So there you go. You had the G.I. Joe point, you had the X-Men animated series point, and then you had the manga boom, especially it seemed to be in Borders, mostly, although Barnes & Nobles had it. All the comic shops quickly started buying manga. The manga publishers showed up at all the Comic-Cons. It was an explosion. It shrank back down a little bit in the late 2000s, early 2010s, I guess it was. Bookstores started having trouble. There was just too much supply out there. It seems to be coming back again now. But there are your 3 points. So the question then is, what comes next? Will superhero movies and TV shows bring the next generation in? When we listen to podcasts 10 years from today, with the up-and-coming creators in their late 20s, what books will they cite, or what media will they cite as their introduction to comic books? Will it be those movies, or will it be Raina Telgemeier? Will it just be scholastic book fairs in general? Will everyone making comics in 10 years think that comics are novels with spot illustrations a la Diary of a Wimpy Kid, or that one with the dog kid one? Will they all quote from Telgemeier's recent Share Your Smile the way my generation knows how to make comics the Marvel way, inside and out by heart? How long will it take before we even recognize that next wave? Will it have a singular defining moment? In today's day and age where everyone can curate their own content, it seems to be almost impossible to think there will be a single entry point for everyone, but will a certain class of media influences dominate? It'll be interesting to see what happens in the years ahead, especially with this upcoming Telgemeier generation of readers. Will they continue reading comics when they're college age and older? Will they move to different kinds of comics? Will they read superhero comics at all? Will they just graduate to some sort of manga book series? Will they graduate perhaps to translated Franco-Belgian series? Maybe this is our in to the American market, maybe the way to get in there, much the way Sandman got in 20 years ago, is to infect that college market with stuff that seems maybe better than it is in some ways. If you say it's translated from Europe, sometimes that sounds very hoi polloi and very smart and very erudite and very special. Maybe that's our way in with European comics. I keep looking for a way in. I haven't quite found it yet. I'm hoping enough publishers continue to do their translations here and there that it adds up to a tidal wave or a snowball that grows into an avalanche at some point. I'm just going to keep that flag flying, keep that fire burnt, or burning if you prefer, and we'll see what happens. But thankfully, we still appear to have comic readers. We may not have them in the numbers centrally located in the direct market that we had in the 80s and before. Maybe the bookstore market is the only way to go. And let's not get into what that portends for the direct market, honestly. But I'm trying to be optimistic here. I'm just trying to point out that there are these moments, and again, it comes from me listening to an awful lot of podcasts. Listening to creators everywhere from the beginning of their career in their early 20s all the way through their 40s and 50s. You hear these stories repeated multiple times, and I think it's a pattern that we can notice.